Section 6 of A Master of Mysteries. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Master of Mysteries by L.T. Mead and Robert Eustace. Chapter 4. The 8-Mile Lock. Part 2. I went quickly to bed, and tired after my long pull, despite the originality of the situation, fell fast asleep. Suddenly I awoke. Someone was bending over me and calling me by my name. I leapt up, and not realizing where I was for the moment, but with a sort of dim idea that I was engaged in some exposure, instinctively seized the man roughly by the throat. In a moment I remembered everything, and quickly released my grip of poor old Jimmy, who was gurgling and gasping with horror. I burst out laughing at my mistake, and begged his pardon for treating him so roughly. "It's all right, sir," he panted. "I hope I didn't frighten you, but I've heard it again, not 5 minutes ago." "The deuce you have," I said, striking a match and looking at my watch. It was nearly 2 o'clock, and before the minute was up I heard distinctly a cry, as if from some great distance, of "Lock! Lock! Lock!" and then all was silence again. "Did you hear it, sir?" whispered the old man, clutching me by the arm with a trembling hand. "Yes, I heard it," I said. "Don't you be frightened, Jimmy. Just wait till I get my clothes on. I'm going to see this thing through." "Be careful, sir. For God's sake, be careful," he whispered. "All right," I said, slipping on some things. "Just get me a strong boat hook, and don't make too much noise. If this mystery is flesh and blood, I'll get to the bottom of it somehow. You stay here, and if I call, come out." I took the thick, short boat hook which he had brought me, and softly, unlatching the door, went out. The moon was now riding high overhead and casting black, fantastic shadows across the little white cottage. All my senses were on the keenest alert. My ears were pricked up for the slightest sound. I crept softly to the bridge on the upper gate, which was open. I looked upstream and thought I could see some little ripples on the surface of the water as if a swift boat had just passed down. But there was no sign of any craft whatever to be seen. It was intensely still, and no sound broke the silence save the intermittent croaking of some bullfrogs in the dark shadows of the pollards on the further bank. Behind me could also be heard the gurgling twinkle of the overflow through the chinks of the lower gate. I stood quite still, gripping the boat hook in my hand, and looking right and left, straining my eyes for the slightest movement of anything around, when suddenly, close below me from the water inside the lock came a loud cry. "Open the lock! For God's sake, open the lock!" I started back, feeling my hair rise and stiffen. The sound echoed and reverberated through the silent night, and then died away, but before it had done so I had sprung to the great beam and closed the upper gate. As I did so, I caught sight of the old man trembling and shaking at the door of the cottage. I called to him to go and watch the upper gate, and racing down to the lower ones, wound up one of the sluices with a few pulls, so as to let out the water with as little escape room as possible. I knew by this means if there were any creature of tangible form in the water, we must find it when the lock was emptied, as its escape was cut off. Each of the following minutes seemed stretched into a lifetime, as, with eyes riveted on the dark water in the lock, I watched its gradual descent. I hardly dared to think of what I expected to see rise to the surface any moment. Would the lock never empty? Down, down sank the level, and still I saw nothing. A long, misshapen arm of black cloud was slowly stretching itself across the moon. Hark! There was something moving about down in the well of darkness below me, and as I stood and watched I saw that the water was uncovering a long, black mass, and that something ran slowly out of the water and began to clamber up the slimy, slippery beams. What in the name of heaven could it be? By the uncertain light I could see only its dim outline. It seemed to have an enormous, bulbous head and dripping, glistening body. The sound of a rapid patter up the towpath told me that the old man had seen it and was running for his life. I rushed down to where the thing was, and as its great head appeared above the edge, with all my force struck it a terrific blow with the boat hook. The weapon flew into splinters in my hand, and the next moment the creature had leapt up beside me and dashed me to the ground with almost superhuman force. I was up and onto it again in a second, and as I caught and closed with it, saw that I had at least to deal with a human being, and that what he lacked in stature, He more than made up for it in strength. The struggle that ensued was desperate and furious. The covering to his head that had splintered the boathook was, I saw, a sort of helmet, completely protecting the head from any blow, and the body was cased in a slippery, closely fitting garment that kept eluding my grasp. To and fro we swayed and wrestled, and for a moment I thought I had met my match till, suddenly freeing my right arm, I got in a smashing blow in the region of the heart. The creature uttered a cry of pain and fell headlong to the ground. Old Jimmy Pegg had hurried back as soon as he heard our struggles and knew that he was not dealing with a being of another world. He ran up eagerly to me. "Here's your ghost, you old coward," I panted. "He has got the hardest bone and muscle I ever felt in a ghost yet. I am not used to fighting men in helmets, and he is as slippery as an eel, but I hope to goodness I have not done more than knock the wind out of him. He is a specimen I should rather like to take alive. Catch hold of his feet and we'll get him inside and see who he is." Between us we carried the prostrate figure inside the cottage and laid him down like a log on the floor. He never moved nor uttered a sound, and I was afraid at first that I had finished him for good and all. I next knelt down and proceeded to unfasten the helmet, which, from its appearance, was something like the kind used by divers, while the old man brought the lantern close to his face. At the first glance I knew in an instant that I had seen the face before, and the next second recognized, to my utter astonishment and horror, that it belonged to Ralph Viner. For the moment I was completely dumbfounded, and gazed at the man without speaking. It was obvious that he had only fainted from the blow, for I could see that he was breathing, and in a few minutes he opened his eyes and fixed them on me with a dull and vacant stare. Then he seemed to recall the situation, though he evidently did not recognize me. "Let me go," he cried, making an effort to rise. "My God, you have killed me!" He pressed his hand to his side and fell back again. His face was contorted as if in great pain. There was obviously only one thing to be done, and that was to send for medical assistance at once. It was clear that the man was badly injured, but to what extent I could not determine. It was impossible to extract the slightest further communication from him. He lay quite still, groaning from time to time. I told Jimmy to go off at once to Farley and bring the doctor. I scribbled a few directions on a piece of paper. The old man hurried out of the cottage, but in less than a minute he was back again in great excitement. "Look here, sir, what I have just picked up," he said. "It's something he has dropped, I reckon." As Jimmy spoke he held out a square leather case. There was a monogram on it. I took it in my hand and pressed the lid. It flew open, and inside, resting on its velvet bed, lay the glittering circlet of diamonds. I held Lady Ridsdale's lost bracelet in my hand. All my suspicions were confirmed. Viner was the thief. Without saying a word, I shut the box and dispatched the old man at once for the doctor, bidding him go as fast as he could. Then I sat down by the prostrate man and waited. I knew that Jimmy would not be back for at least 2 hours. The grey dawn was beginning to steal in through the little lattice window when Viner moved, opened his eyes and looked at me. He started as his eyes fell on the case. "You are Mr. Bell," he said slowly. "Ridsdale told me that you were coming to the Theodora on purpose to discover the mystery of the lost diamonds. You didn't know that I should give you an opportunity of discovering the truth even before you arrived at the houseboat. Bend down close to me. You have injured me. I may not recover. Hear what I have to say." I bent over him, prepared to listen to his words, which came out slowly. "I am a forger and a desperate man. 3 weeks ago I forged one of Ridsdale's checks and lessened my friend's balance to the tune of £5,000. He and his wife were old friends of mine, but I wanted the money desperately, and was impervious to sentiment or anything else. On that first day when you met me, although I seemed cheery enough, I was fit to kill myself. I had hoped to be able to restore the stolen money long before Ridsdale was likely to miss it. But this hope had failed. I saw no loophole of escape, and the day of reckoning could not be far off. What devil prompted Ridsdale to bring those diamonds on board, heaven only knows. The moment I saw them, they fascinated me, and I knew I should have a try for them. All during that evening's festivity I could think of nothing else. I made up my mind to secure them by hook or by crook. Before we retired for the night, however, I thought I would give Ridsdale a chance. I asked him if he would lend me the exact sum I had already stolen from him, £5,000,